Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Marie Vigourou.
And I'm Drew Schulman. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 9, Citizen Fang. Let's get this show on the road. Okay, I'm going to admit it. This episode finally did it. Fucking over the flashback, Sam. God damn, I'm done.
It took a while, but we got there.
It was another conversation we were having with another mutual when we brought it up briefly, and I was like, oh, I need to tell you how much I hate them, but I'll wait till the recording session.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, where would you hide out and what job would you take in a witness protection style type of situation? On the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. Every week is just a whole new level of unhinged on that little feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and to claim your perks. And thank you if you already do. And please make sure to listen to this because honestly, it's very entertaining, if nothing else.
They have taken on a whole new level of chaotic fun. I love it.
So, what did we think of this episode?
Benny is perfect. He can do nothing wrong. I love Benny.
Yay! We got there!
I feel so bad. Someone on Twitter was like, finally, someone else who doesn't like Benny. And I'm just like, oh, I'm so sorry. I also think we're reading that person's voicemail this week.
So, are we ready for a recap of this episode, Drew?
I certainly am. Count me down.
3, 2, 1, Louisiana.
Benny is chilling in Louisiana, working a restaurant with this very nice woman who runs a restaurant. We find out later is his great, some number of great-granddaughters, or niece or something. I don't know, some distant relation. And then suddenly there's some killings going on in the town. This other hunter, Martin, who I think we've met before, or at least the brothers mentioned knowing before. I can't remember if we met him before. Anyways, unimportant because he's basically a bit part of this whole thing. And it turns out it wasn't Benny. Benny's still good because Benny can't do anything wrong. And it's another vampire who's basically framing him in an attempt to force him to join his gang. But then him and Dean team up and go after him, even though Sam and this Martin Jew tried to team up and locked Dean into a radiator so they can go after him, and they didn't catch him somehow because Dean sent Sam on a wild goose chase, and now he's back, with Amelia. Ooh, cliffhanger, and Benny's gonna go into hiding. But before all this can end, we have to at least touch on the fact that Martin went full on crazy batshit lunatic killer mode and kidnapped his granddaughter, and it looks like he's been killed by Benny, but Benny had a good reason to do it, and I'm okay with Benny doing this killing time. I want to know then, how does this fit into the theory of Amelia's not real?
It doesn't. I mean, I suppose that one could say, well, oh, he's just looking through a random woman's house, windows, very creepily a la Taylor Swift. I look through people's windows, it's one of those things. We're going to talk again about this, not this episode, but we are going to talk about it again, and we'll be able to conclude what we want. This episode was written by Daniel Laughlin and directed by Nick Kopis and originally aired on December 5th, 2012. I think this might be the last episode with flashbacks. At least it is one of the very last ones. So I know that you said earlier that you were done with them. Your timing could not be better, Drew. I have to say, congrats to you. Excellent timing.
I am very proud of myself.
This episode moves forward a few storylines from this season. So this season is actually, I think, fairly well constructed, even though I disagree with the continued use of flashbacks. Because we're kind of seeing things come together in this episode. There's Benny and Amelia in the same episode, and it's Dean doing things. Anyway, so everything is interconnected in this one in a way that I find really cool and fun.
My thoughts on the episode overall were I like it. I kind of like what it's doing. I like it as a standalone. I like it as part of the larger seasonal story. Yes, the flashbacks, I'm done with them. You saying that this might be the last one kind of makes sense because I think that finally seeing Amelia again for the first time since leaving in the flashbacks, basically, we're now there's nothing more to flash back to. We've caught up with the present finally.
We are now in the present of both timelines, both for Dean and for Sam. So we're told by Lizzie that Roy, who we know as Benny, is gone fishing. Now, fishing is a bit of an interesting thing in Supernatural because it's always linked to Dean. The last time that we had anybody fishing on this show was when Cass went into Dean's dreams to be able to talk to him undetected.
My first thought was going back to the whole, like, vampirates thing with him being like at sea, and fishing could be seen as like a fishing for not fish per se.
Just like in Brokeback Mountain when they were going fishing, right? On fishing trips.
I'm seeing what you're putting out here.
There you go. We bring back Martin, who is the ex-hunter who knew the Winchesters and who Sam and Dean worked with in 511 Sam Interrupted.
And that's how little this person had an effect on me. I don't remember that at all.
We do get a few mentions of John Winchester in this episode, which we will talk about later. This week, our theme is presumption, which is a word that comes from late Latin, which meant confidence and audacity. And in classical Latin, it meant more like a taking for granted and anticipation. And I have to say that this was basically the first time that I was introduced to the concept of like late Latin and classical Latin. Like I had no idea that there was a difference between the two. So anyway, that was cool. That was a new thing for me this week. I do think that this is interesting to kind of put those two together because there are some connotations here like, audacity and taking for granted that kind of hints that presumptions aren't even based in judgment. And so the current definition of the word seems to indicate that too. There's this idea of like something being taken to be true and often used as the basis for other ideas, right? Although it is not known for certain. So I like this idea of like presumptions being things that we think are true without having really thought them through, for better or worse.
It's a tool that I find so useful in the idea of like a story like this. We as an audience have like preconceived notions. There is the presumption of like they're bringing in a hunter, Martin. Yes, we've had Gordon in the past, but even Gordon was set up to be kind of like villain-esque. Martin we've only known to be good. So the presumption is he's there with good intention. It's a great narrative tool, and the show does it very well. I'm very impressed by it.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting episode. Like if we can take like a very quick critical approach to it. Like I think that it's well made. How about we start by talking about Sam?
We know Sam's already pretty pissed about the whole Benny thing, and an excuse to put him down seems right up his alley. And I get the feeling that killing Benny because he's a vampire almost seems like an excuse to Sam. He doesn't want to just like kill Benny out of some kind of jealousy, but it feels like deep down he wants the excuse to like have some kind of karmic balance, and using the like preconceived notions of hunters have got to hunt things as his way to do this is like abusing the presumption and expectations set previously by just like everything they've done.
So like in previous episodes, and as we were also reminded in The Road So Far, Sam was already all in to kill Benny. Like he did not need much convincing. He was just kind of waiting for an excuse, like you were saying. And when that excuse comes, he's telling Dean about it in the car, and he's like seething silently, right? Like he's just like so mad, he's shaking. Like you can tell that he's getting really worked up about this. But then I did notice a shift, I think, when Dean says, okay, well, let's go investigate. Like, I don't think that Sam was expecting to hear Dean say that. And I really do think that things are changed for Sam the moment that he hears it. Like, it feels like he's seeing Dean as like more capable of like, quote unquote, cold, rational thought than he thought he would be when it comes to Benny. Like, he's not just emotionally reacting to this. Like, he's actually thinking with his head on his shoulders. And I do think that we see that even more when they go meet with Martin, right? Like Sam is actively listening to what Dean has to say rather than just like jumping to conclusions the way that Martin is, and he does give Dean like the benefit of the doubt. Like he would never do that for Benny. And he says so very, very clearly, right? He goes like, I don't know Benny, but he does know Dean. And he is ready to make allowances that he wouldn't usually make for somebody else. Also, I do appreciate that he says like, we've killed for a lot less, which is very true on this show, right? Like they have killed for a lot less. Sam is being asked to like hold back for someone that he's pretty sure has killed other people before. So he's like, okay, this is not, you killed Amy. Just bring that back. You killed Amy. And I do want to be fair to Sam, though, because I feel like I'm going to get some hate mail for this, but I'm going to be brave and I'm going to say it anyway. But it wouldn't be the first time that they get betrayed by one of Dean's boyfriends.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
I mean, it's true. Cass done fucked up. That's all I'm saying.
Cass and Benny are perfect. Nothing can go wrong.
Benny never betrayed Dean.
Let me have my delusions. I think Sam's surprise at Dean's willingness to go along is so interesting, and I will talk about Dean a little bit more later. But what bothers me here most is the way that Sam takes Martin's side in all this and almost uses him as a catalyst for his choices. Like, it's not him knocking out Dean. It's not him planning to kill Benny. But it sure as hell ain't stopping Martin from, leading the charge. He's like allowing the circumstances and status quo of it all to be his vehicle to get on with the killing of Benny that he feels is ultimately the right decision. Whether that is 100% Sam or 100% let's get some vengeance, I don't know.
I wonder how much of Sam's trust for Martin is actually projection. And I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a second. Because we know that Sam's mental health, especially in the last season, has been abysmal. We know that. We also know that he ended up in a mental health facility, just like Martin did a few years back. He was discharged, so was Martin. And so I'm wondering if Sam isn't just wishfully thinking that if Martin is fine, because if Martin is fine, then he is fine too. But if Martin's not fine, then I think in Sam's head, it doesn't bode very well for him, even though they are two separate people with two separate issues, with two separate things, two separate lives, two separate personalities. In Sam's mind, he's like, so long as Martin is fine, I'm fine. And he does at one point tell Martin, to shut it, right? So he does put that boundary there. And it's when he brings up John, because Martin says, I'm glad that your dad wasn't around to hear that. He'd have had a mind to take you both out the woodshed and show you what's what. Let's put some words on subtext here, because what exactly was John going to do to Sam and Dean to show them what's what in the woodshed?
Physical abuse. I mean, I'm talking the belt. That is exactly what, there is no subtext here. It is a beat is a beating.
So Sam is okay, buddy, you're going too far. I thought it was too far when Martin knocked out Dean, but hey, Sam makes some questionable choices in this episode.
What I was saying before is the difference between what Sam wants to happen so that he can get to the goal, which is the Benny's a monster that needs to be killed. But as soon as Martin is not being useful in that direction, he's able to shut Martin down. It shows us, the audience, how much Sam is I don't like this guy. I'm not on his level, but it's a means to an end. We do also see Sam dealing with Amelia, both in present time at the very end of the episode and in flashbacks, which I've already mentioned have become egregious and tiring. I'm done with them. But in present day, it's this fake text from Dean that Sam reacts to with no second thought, which is not surprising, but clearly shows Dean's willingness to take advantage of Sam's feelings and take advantage of what he knows he'll do in order to get him out of the way or to do what he wants, which is very similar to the way that Sam has been treating Martin, kind of using his knowledge of him and his knowledge of hunters to get what he wants.
Sam messed with Dean's boyfriend, so Dean is messing with Sam's girlfriend. And I'm not saying that either of those things are right. And I'm not saying that either of those things are good. Allowing Martin to just take Dean out like that was really messed up of Sam, in my opinion. Do you remember in that episode when Dean gets a call from Benny and Benny's I need help. And Dean is okay, got you. And he leaves and he's I need a personal day. You took a year off. He's being super mean to Sam. Sam leaves Martin stranded on the highway.
Yup.
What is this, Sam?
The hypocrisy.
all of a sudden you need a personal day and you're not even telling people when you're leaving. Like, oh. Sorry, I'm getting mad at them. They're being so ridiculous, both of them.
I do want to touch on fuzzy camera flashback land. We see Sam leaving Amelia as her not dead husband returns. And like, this is Sam being presumptuous. He's decided on the outcome for Amelia rather than let her be a part of it. He sees the way things were and how things should be, and he's put everyone in the little boxes that he's presupposed they go in, which includes Amelia with her husband and him alone again.
I'm not sure how I feel about all that, because personally, obviously, like, I agree with Don, like, when he says that the only one who can make the decision is Amelia. Like, I just find that respectful and accurate, right? Like, she should be choosing which one of these two men she wants to be with at this point. At the same time, I also understand Sam, like, not wanting to always wonder if Amelia would have been happier with Don, or wondering if Amelia wonders if she'd been happier with Don. Because it's not like she's choosing between two boyfriends. She's choosing between her husband and this guy that apparently their relationship moved very fast. I would be very uncomfortable in Sam's position, to be honest. But I do love that he pulled a Meredith Grey moment of like, pick me, choose me, love me earlier in the episode. So I did love that. I did appreciate that. To try to bring it back to the theme of presumption, though, I wonder if Sam's not like giving into, or maybe just realizing that their relationship was always going to be a temporary one, or that maybe it wasn't as good as what he thought. Like, maybe he realizes in that moment that, like, he presumed that they were a good long-term fit without actually really having thought about it. Like, we know that their relationship moved really, really quickly. And maybe in all the haste, like, he never took the time to really use his judgment. You know, that was the whole point that interesting. That Amelia's dad was saying when he was visiting, right? He was like, you know, you're both running. And maybe Sam is taking this moment to be like, okay, so if I stop running for a second, maybe this doesn't actually make sense.
The rational thing for a person to do would be to have that conversation with the other person, who I agree with Dawn should be the one to make this decision. I'm not saying Sam's choice was wrong or is not what ultimately would have happened. He might have been right, but I think he should have at least had these conversations, shared this that you just laid out so beautifully with Amelia, and allow it.
But do you think Sam is even aware of this? Like, I don't think he is. You know what I mean? Like,
ultimately, I think if he knew this, he wouldn't be in the situation he's in now. He wouldn't be having this conversation.
There you go.
I disagree with what he's doing, even though he thinks he's doing the right thing. Ultimately, it's taking away her ability to make a decision because he's making it for her.
Whoa. Hold on. Sam is also allowed to leave the relationship.
True. You're right.
If he doesn't want to be in the relationship anymore, he can leave. It's fine, right? What I disagree with is him not really interrogating the why. But that's more of a him issue than anything else. But like, it's not like he's not removing Amelia's choice, like by choosing to leave. Like, anybody in that situation, there are three people in this weird love triangle, right? You know, Amelia's role is to choose between these two people. And the role of the two other people is to either say, well, you know what? I don't want to be in this. And so I'm removing myself from the situation. And I will respect your choice, right? Like, those are the two choices at this point. And Sam is choosing to remove himself. I disagree with him doing it because, oh, this is how it should be, because I don't think that's the real reason. And so I don't think that it's really fair of him to give that reason to Amelia. You know, if you feel that this is the right decision for you, then my guy, leave, right? No one's holding you here.
And unfortunately, like, we all know the real answer is to do what I've been taught to do, and that's just allow thruples to happen.
I mean, if that's what they're into, yeah, for sure. But again, like, let's talk about it properly.
Shall we move to Dean? So Dean this week gets to play like an interesting role. The presumption of his like public image versus his true self. Like, everyone who knows of Dean knows his manly image, the mask we've discussed countless times. But it goes further than that, just a character he plays. He's well-known hunter, it seems. He has some clout in this, world. Like the brothers in general do in the hunter community have recognition. So imagine meeting a pseudo-legendary hunter for the first time since you last helped them in an asylum, and then find out he's gone soft and is defending and even befriending monsters. Like, a little bit of shattering there.
So I'm actually glad that you're bringing this up because there's that moment, but then there's also Benny telling him that he lost his edge since Purgatory. So it feels like everyone around Dean is kind of telling him that he's not quite enough or like not quite right. Like Dean is just not fitting in, whether it's with the monsters or with the regular people. And that, my friend, is the quintessential bisexual coding.
On that note, I think Dean has changed and grown so much over the last 7+ seasons of this show. And we're now getting to see that evolution in universe from another hunter who had presupposed expectations of him. We as an audience have seen how much Dean has grown and evolved, but other folks who only know of him from reputation and story and very likely still have him linked to John, unfortunately, in their minds. The presumption of many, unfortunately, I feel will be like Martin's, that Dean is just John 2.0, and I hate that.
I wrote in my notes that Martin is basically opening a window into the kind of hunter that John was. And you all know that my opinion of John as a human being, but also as a hunter, quite low. And yet somehow this episode made me think even less of him. Martin is ready to hurt innocent people to kill a vampire. Like, you don't hunt the people to hunt the thing. Like, that is not what the family business is about. Like, you save the people and then you hunt the thing. And I think what troubles me about that is that Martin held John in such high regard that it must mean that this is something that, like, John could have or even probably would have done, right? And so again, to be clear, fuck John Winchester. All my homies hate John Winchester. And I'm going to say it again. Fuck John Winchester.
I hate him. I hate him so much. Ugh.
I'm actually so glad that Dean didn't hear the woodshed comment because, like, yeah, fuck John Winchester for abusing his kids.
Dean clearly understands the optics of all of this, both in how he uses his knowledge of Sam, in my opinion, rightfully to trick him into running to save Amelia, but also his likely correct assertion that the other hunters are going to be looking for Benny and he's got to go underground and really disappear for a while. Like, he understands that sometimes things are just as they appear on the surface, and while there can be nuance and room for growth, himself trusting Benny being able to control his vampiric urges, some things take time and maybe slower to evolve. Hunter's relationships with monsters, the Dean folks used to know versus who he's becoming, which all really just sounds like a metaphor for homophobia to me.
There's like this ongoing joke, quote unquote, in fandom that Sam is like extremely homophobic in season 8. And like, to be crystal clear, I don't think that Sam is actually homophobic. And I don't think that anyone who is making that joke really thinks that Sam is actually homophobic. But again, his actions are used as a metaphor for that, like you said. It's a weird situation to put your character in because we know that Sam's not homophobic, and yet
he's taking all the actions that metaphorically represent the homophobia in the metaphorical scenario of Dean's realizations and existence.
And so like the joke is like, oh yeah, Sam is so homophobic in season 8. And like, we know that Sam is not homophobic, but it's like, he's homophobic in season 8.
I love it, but I hate it. Yes.
I tweeted today actually that But Daddy, I Love Him is actually about Dean and Benny.
I'm going to be listening to that again later. I'm going to be thinking about that.
Oh my gosh, you are in for a treat. Well, actually, this works out really well because But Daddy, I Love Him is actually a line from The Little Mermaid, right? The Little Mermaid, which was written by Hans Christian Andersen, who was a gay man who wrote The Little Mermaid as a way to mourn this man that he was in love with who was marrying a woman. So I think that this fits really well with the story of Dean and Benny.
Yay, layers.
Layers. I also want to just add that like all of Dean's presumptions of Martin are correct. Like all of them. That he shouldn't be hunting, that Benny is gonna kill him, that he should leave, that like all of them are correct. Like he is the righteous man in this moment where he is just like, you'll be lucky if you get out alive, he tells Sam. He's going to kill you. It's just like, oh, okay.
That was, in a rewatch, was a moment where I was like, oof, a doofa right on the head. If we can get to Benny, who literally spends the entire episode doing everything to oppose the presumptions we've been set to expect from monsters since the show began, we see him connect with family to ground himself. And hold himself accountable to someone. He resists temptation of blood on multiple occasions in this episode. And this is all very well done because, like, I was convinced we would see Benny slip up this episode. Like, I was ready for, like, the other shoe to fall. And while he does kill Martin, that doesn't really fit what I had presumed would happen as far as Benny killing somebody.
Listen, one thing that I find particularly upsetting in this episode is that Benny does everything right. Literally. Like, he's laying low. He's, like, making these connections. He's taking on some responsibility. He's literally like building a life for himself, you know, like that's what he tells Dean, you know, like with Andrea gone and you hunting again. I figured it was time for a homecoming. Benny has never done anything wrong so far. And he does nothing wrong in this episode. And he's telling Dean the truth. He's letting him in on what's going on. He keeps his word. Like, anyway, of course, at this point, like, I'm pretty sure it's clear that Benny, at this point anyway, like you can tell that Benny is a tragic character, like misery seems to find him, right? So regardless of him doing all the things right, like he still ends up miserable. But none of it is his doing. Like he had no business with the vampire who was killing people. And it was Sam who sicked Martin on him just out of like hate/homophobia, right? Like he never asked for any of this. My poor baby.
Benny is actively showing the audience that not all the rules we've been taught by this show are set in stone. The rules that hunters seem to live by, Martin specifically, or as the icon for. And sure, we've had many other examples of monsters aren't all bad, but we're finally getting to see it like in a more solid relationship to hunters, specifically Dean and by extension Sam. And this concept has been introduced before, but Benny is the first time it's been made a recurring mainstay. And as far as I can tell, like, not an act or temporary means a la Ruby or Meg. Like, this is genuine Benny. This is him.
I think on a more meta or, like, critical level, this is really when the concept of monsters becomes really interesting on Supernatural. For me, anyway. Because, like, I find that when your monsters are always, like, just cartoonishly evil, it makes them a bit one-tone and kind of boring, right? And so then you start creating these characters like Benny who have more depth than just like kill, kill, kill. And then all of a sudden you're creating these like moral quandaries for your heroes. And that's literally what this episode is entirely about.
That is exactly what I wanted to get to here. And I think Benny is so perfect as the, I'd almost say protagonist of this episode, essentially. You know who we don't love? Martin. Much like John, fuck Martin. So often the monster of the week acts as our tool to drive the story home and connects us to our theme. And given what we learn about Martin, I think this point holds true, kind of me saying Martin is the monster this week. And while we do deal with a vampire this week, I think Martin is the true villain. Like, his worldview is so set in stone that he needs to prove that Benny is indeed a monster before he can kill him. And he's willing to become a monster himself if it means he can set the world back to its status quo, air quotes. And in his mind, I truly believe he sees what he's doing as like right, as he will be killing a bad guy and being a good hunter, despite putting an innocent woman's life at risk and physically harming her.
Martin is a bit of like a nothing burger of a character, I think. Like, he doesn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. But I find that his real narrative value is what he tells us about John. Like, because like I said earlier, if Martin respected John as much as he did, then they must have had like similar ways of doing business, let's say. And that's not saying good things about John.
It all reminds me a bit of Gordon and his need to kill Sam because it's what a hunter should do. The only difference is Gordon was like physically transformed into a monster against his will. Martin is choosing his actions of his own volition.
arguably Gordon was also a monster from his own actions, I think anyway. Only for him, like the transformation was physical in the end, right? Like the narrative kind of took it that much further. That's two, like arguably three, if we count John, three hunters that we meet who themselves are monsters. So I don't know, maybe that says something about hunters in general, like maybe something to consider. There's one thing we haven't talked about yet this season, and it's the fact that Benny is from Louisiana. And like, of course, we've mentioned this in passing, but we haven't really had a discussion about it because this season aired between 2012 and 2013. So it's fair to say that it would have been like written in early to mid 2012, which is when HBO series True Blood had just aired its fourth season. Now, we've talked about True Blood before a little bit on this podcast, but I wanted to kind of be really, really clear that the TV show is an adaptation of a romance novel series, which I've read every volume, by the way. I personally never got past season 3 of True Blood, but I've read all the books. Now, the premise of the story is that vampires have like revealed themselves to humans and are trying to gain equal rights through the American justice and political system. And the show draws a lot of parallels between the way that vampires are treated and the way queer people are treated. And again, for the younger folks who are listening, keep in mind that in the United States, queer people only gained the right to like countrywide right to marry each other in 2015. So when the show started airing in 2008, there was a lot of campaigning going on that demanded for that right to be recognized. And also in 2008, George W. Bush was still president, and he was just such a staunch opponent of marriage equality. And like, of course, it wouldn't be America if there weren't like really religious extremists screaming about hell and damnation. So True Blood, the TV show, uses all of these elements and kind of represents it through historically queer monsters, vampires. And it all takes place in Louisiana, in a cafe. So yeah, I personally find it hard to watch this episode without thinking about True Blood, at least a little bit, because like there are just so many little nods to it. And we know that Supernatural uses like media references to tell their story. So I just think that it's interesting to refer to a show about queerness and equal rights in an episode where Dean is basically screaming, "But Daddy, I love him," about Benny. When his brother and an older man who knew his father is like, "Your dad would have beat this out of you." I think this is Supernatural being Supernatural again.
Amazingly, I've never seen any of True Blood. I've only ever known what you've said from like cultural osmosis. And pretty much all I knew was hot vampires, Louisiana. So
that's really all you need to know. It's all the romance novels were about, frankly. Because that's the thing, the romance novels don't really go into, or not as much into the like political thing, but the show really does. Like the show is clearly drawing a parallel. This week, we have a message from Jeannette, and before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today or to ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us the recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Jeannette writes, "Hi, I discovered your podcast a little later than I would have liked, but the important part is that I did. I really hated the way the show ended. It just felt like a betrayal in so many ways. And for me that had Supernatural with me growing up with it, I decided that I will let go now and forget about it. Then I started listening to this podcast and it brought it back to me like a warm hug. I wanted to touch up on Season 2, Episode 20, What Is and What Should Never Be. Amazing as it was, I hated watching that episode because of how wrong they had the jinn lore, which is actually not a lore. It's said in the Quran that God created men from mud and jinn from fire. They're actual creatures that exist beyond the human reach and eyes, and it's said that some of them are actually Muslim and believe in God. It's forbidden of them to come in sight or play with humans, as it's set to be funny to do so, but then the show makes them look like a monster, and actually have the nerve to make Sam say that there is little about them in Quran made me so mad. Couldn't they just make up some creatures, make up some lore? I'm really sorry for this long message, but I had to say something about this. I really love your show and what you're doing in separating the characters from the writers and creators, because at the end, this is what kept me going for 15 seasons. Characters that I felt so connected with and for so long time.
Jannat, thank you so much for this message. I really appreciate it. This is the second message that we get specifically about djinns. I mean, quite frankly, it's making me realize how little I know about them. And I think what I'm feeling this time around reading your message is that it's really unfortunate because the only lore that I know about djinns is from Supernatural. And so in my mind, the only lore that I have about these very specific creatures are from people who are not Muslim. And that makes me quite sad. I feel like this is a loss for everybody, like for Muslim folks who are like, well, this is not how they should be represented, but it's also a loss for people at large who don't have access to or who aren't told about this particular about djinns properly, right? So thank you for bringing that up again. And yeah, you can talk about the ending of Supernatural forever, but I'm glad that you're along for this ride. And I'm sorry that you dislike Benny and that we like him. I'm sorry about that. I'm so sorry.
I'm also sorry that interaction, like when I realized we had that little interaction on Twitter, like roughly around the time of this recording and knowing like what we were about to record, I thought was just such a weird little like happenstance. But I really want to thank you for this message. Again, one of my favorite things is learning about the lore and mythology and the history and the culture of different cultures. I find it so enthralling. And I myself, I'm with you, I'm with you. Like, I mean, the djinn for me were really just like a few pop culture references in shows like Supernatural, their creature type in Magic the Gathering. And even they have gone on to say that, like, I don't think the term was they regret using it as a creature type. They regret the way some of the original cards depicted them, and like have made it a point that if they ever use it again as a creature type to actually properly like make it appropriate and fit thematically in the lore. And they've actually like reduced printing certain things because of this, because they understand the lore implications. And another video game I love uses djinn as like just basically an offhand name for like a spiritual creature, and like otherwise completely separates the like from the lore. And you're right, like why use this thing? Like, this is a specific thing that has a lore and a history and a people, and it's known. If you're gonna make up the rest of it, why use the name? Why tie it into this other lore? Anyways, I'm with you 100%. Like, at this point, just give it a different name. Let's pretend it's not, would be the easiest way to do this. Or if you want to use djinn, do it right.
Or maybe, you know, invite Muslim writers into your writer's room. What a revolutionary idea. Anyway, thank you, Jannat. Let's talk about our reflection and call to action.
I'm going to be very, very blunt and just say that I am privileged. Like, I won't sugarcoat it or try to make excuses. I'm a white man living in a first world country. While I am queer, I am very much straight passing and presenting. So I need to continue using this platform that the world has decided I get in order to amplify the message of other people, to help those who aren't being heard be heard. I have said what I need to say. I will say the things I need to say. I want everyone to be heard and to share their messages.
I'm feeling particularly touched by Sam projecting his hopes and fears onto Martin. Like I was talking about earlier, I think he's thinking, well, Martin has to be fine, you know, because if he's not fine, then I'm not fine. And it's making me feel called to keep that behavior in check for myself, just to kind of remember that my situation is not somebody else's, and that even though there might be a lot of similarities, they're not going through their life the way that I am going through mine. Like, especially when people around me are going through stuff that like triggers something in me. I'm feeling called to remember that it's not actually happening to me. This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Drew Schulman and Marie Vigourou. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber and for our merch store and our socials. And write us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.